And we're live. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, Randy and I are going to be talking about some of the top mistakes anglers make when practicing for tournaments. Randy has 30 years of tournament experience to share with us, and we're going to break it down with you guys in terms of how to improve your practice fishing, how to stop wasting time, and also how to maybe perform better in tournaments by improving your practice strategies. Randy, how's it going tonight?
Doing good, man. Just dragging a little bit. I've been practicing this week down at Grand Lake for the Toyota Series. In fact, I got tomorrow's our last practice day, and I live about 2 hours away from the lake, so I've been driving back and forth every day because it's a little bit too close to stay down there. But man, I've been driving constantly, so it's good to be sitting down for a little bit out the truck.
That's great. Well, how's practice going? Speaking of practice, how's your practice going over there on Grand?
Man, it was the first day. I've practiced 2 days so far. The first day was really tough. I didn't do that great. Today, I had a decent day. Not like an outstanding day, but I think I figured out, I need to be fishing in the tournament. So tomorrow got a half a day to sort of refine it a little bit. So gonna get out there and see if we can get on them on Thursday.
Awesome. Well, we know you have some experience out there on Grand, so we're looking forward to seeing you bring in some big bags across the stage.
Yeah, hopefully.
Awesome. Well, we're going to... oh, by the way, some guys are saying, Randy, how are the new 15-inch graphs on your boat treating you?
Yeah, I've been doing nothing but live scoping all week long, man. I've just been out looking at those pre-spawn, big pre-spawn hogs in my live scope.
How many fish have you caught this week on the live scope versus on the bank?
Man, I'm not on the bank anymore. I'm totally off the bank now.
For those who missed it, Randy did an April Fool's joke on his channel last week. We were kind of planning that one for a while, and he grabbed a boat from one of the local boat dealers that was rigged up with live scope, 360 imaging, everything, and then made a video. You guys have probably seen it if you've seen Randy's channel, and you know his stance. He is anti-live scope, and he was talking about how he's going to get a third graph. He had a 15-inch unit on the boat he was pretending to have, and he's like, I'm going to add a double stack of two 15-inch units. It was classic. Go check out that video on Randy's channel. It was like, I just dropped 20 grand on fish finders or something. That was awesome. Oh man. Oh, and then I'm getting some crap for my my mustache here, Randy. I'm one that my wife is the one who asked for the mustache. That's good. But also I feel like, we're going to be doing some challenge videos coming up, and I'm going to be fishing the bank a little bit more. And when I really went back and thought about it, think about this, Randy. Who are some of the best anglers in history that were just dominant over the years? Tommy Biffle, great stash. Ron Sheffield, Denny Brower, you got Hank Parker. I mean, How many guys have a great stash? And, Shaw Grigsby. I mean, I feel like there's power in that stash. And so I'm going to kind of grow it out and see if it works.
Yeah, that you may be bringing it back to your generation because, man, that's sort of old school, man. Mustache.
Yeah, I'm not going to go to the short shorts, but I think I'll stop at the mustache. I'm not going to go for the Biffle shorts, but yeah.
Like a Seth Spider and Chris Zaldane look, man.
Yeah, hey, you got to try something new. I'm not going to get the John Cox dyed curls or anything like that, though.
Hey, is that real hair on him?
Oh, yeah, that is 100% real.
That is crazy looking. I look at it, it's like, man, how does that even work?
Yeah, I have no idea. He cut it apparently because he missed 2 cuts. He grew the hair and he did terrible. So apparently that's not a thing anymore. Anyways,
I thought it was a wig when I saw it on TV. It's like, now what in the world is that?
No, it was real. But anyways, well, enough beating around the bush. Let's jump into the heart of the topic here, Randy. So we're going to be covering 4 different mistakes that anglers make when practice fishing for tournaments. And this is, we're going to be kind of talking about in all different contexts. So most guys probably practice for local tournaments, just fun fishing tournaments, stuff like that. And in a lot of cases, guys practice the weekend before the tournament, or maybe they fish even a month before the tournament. And then there's other guys who get to fish right before the tournament, maybe the day before, they take off a day of work, or maybe the tournament's on a Sunday and they can fish on Saturday. And then there's also the guys who fish maybe multi-day tournaments where they can practice 2 or 3 days. So we're going to kind of cover all those different styles and try to give some tips for everyone. But the first mistake that we see a ton of anglers make while they're practice fishing is that they try to win practice. What do we mean by this? Well, basically, they try to go out and catch as many big fish in practice as they can, or even if they're not catching fish, they're trying to get as many bites in practice as possible and shake off as many good fish as they can, because they think the more fish they can shake off, the more bites they get, the better their tournament day is going to be, which is definitely not always the case. Randy, do you kind of want to maybe tell us a story or give us an example of that?
Oh man, I learned that lesson long ago, and that's why I usually have very poor practices because I don't stay around in an area long enough to see what's there. But that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that anglers make, on a lot of different levels, just beginning anglers, medium level, and even some pros. And I think it's a combination of it's maybe it's ego a little bit. I mean, there may be a little bit. I don't want to say laziness, but there may be like a hesitation, like to cut your hooks off or something like that. And then a lot of it is just not understanding, how that's going to affect the fish. There's a lot of different elements involved with that. And I can tell you guys right now, as far as winning practice goes, sticking fish, it even goes beyond that. It goes beyond sticking fish because, in my opinion, just simply showing a bait or shaking a fish off is a negative to the fish. I don't even like to shake fish off. I mean, one of the biggest things that I learned from Clun years ago, and Clun doesn't shake fish off. He sticks everything, but he doesn't stay around in an area long. And one of the things that he taught me long ago is that you sort of have to be able to mentally pre-fish an area. And you've got to have confidence that you can roll into that area cold in the tournament day and possibly catch them. A prime example is down at Grand Lake today. I mean, some of the stretches, like, say I pulled in on a stretch and I caught a fish and there was quite a bit of water up in front of me. I just pulled the trolling motor up and left. I didn't even, a lot of people would maybe keep working down through that bank and just see how many bites they can get to see how good it is. That's a huge mistake. I'll figure that out in the tournament. I'll find out how many fish are in that bank on the tournament, because what happens is it's a negative any way around. Let's say, for example, today I caught one, and then say I went down another 20 yards and caught one or didn't catch one. If I caught one, that's one fish that I'm not going to catch in the tournament. And if I didn't catch one, that undermines my confidence. So after you catch one like that, if you've got some similar targets and similar cover, just move on through that area. Don't even let them see the bait. That's a big part to it. But I see guys all the time. I mean, some guys have a reputation for winning practice. I mean, I'm not going to mention any names, but I mean, I've got a handful of names I could come up with that every tournament, you talk to him the first day of practice, I got 20 pounds. I caught 30 keepers today. And in the tournament, they'll catch one or two, and it's like they wonder what happened. And you think that after that happening repetitive over and over again, that they would sort of, draw the arrows to what's going on there. So, like I said, it's not as simple as, just simply not sticking fish in practice. Because here's another thing you have to consider. Let's say if you're fishing a lake that's got a 15 or 16 inch minimum length limit on it, and you're getting a lot of bites. Obviously, you sort of need to know, if you're catching keepers or not, because a 14 incher feels the same as a 16 incher. If you flip a jig in there and a 14 incher swimming out with it, you can't tell the difference. So in a situation like that, yeah, you might want to lean on them a little bit harder, just to get a feel for that. But everything is like a feel. It's like just a matter of how much pressure the area you can support. Here's what I'm talking about. If you're fishing like a vast grass bed, a big open flat grass bed with a lot of cover, obviously you can lean on them heavier because there's a lot more area there. There's a lot more, it's a bigger group of fish. But if you're going down through a row of boat docks or some isolated laydowns, and there's a dock every 50 feet or there's a laydown every 100 feet, you can't go and get bites and shake fish off and pick fish off of every piece of isolated cover. And one of the biggest mistakes or things I can give you guys is just, you see guys, thrown in there with no hook and they're shaking the fish off. Don't even do that, because like I said, that's going to spook those fish. I bet that here's like a statistics I can give you. I would say out of every 50 bass I shake off in practice, I bet I don't catch 2 or 3 of those bass in the exact same spot when I come back there in the tournament. Now, whether they've moved or I spooked them, it's hard to say, but yeah, it's there's a lot of variables involved to that topic.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of the most fascinating things I ever heard from a guy tournament fishing is Brian Thrift. I love following Brian Thrift fishing. He's awesome. What he always says is he sets a hook on every single fish in practice, and if he doesn't want to get a bite, he just doesn't throw on the area. Now, Brian is an expert with his electronics, and this is something I used to do when I tournament fished a lot back in the day. I'll just give you guys one example. I don't want to spend too much time talking about my tournament experience, but just kind of give you a general idea from Lake Dardanelle, where I won a college regional championship on Lake Dardanelle back in, well, it was like 5 or 6 years ago. And in that tournament, the places I was catching my fish, I actually never made a cast on most of them during my practice days. What I would do is go around with my electronics and I would graph, for example, an offshore brush pile or an offshore area out here that looked nice. And a lot of times you would see bait fish there, you'd see fish on the graph, things like that. And what I tried to do in my practice days was graph as much as possible, and I knew that there was going to be a lot of other anglers fishing these offshore spots. So instead of sitting up there and making as many casts as I could on these spots trying to get bit, what I did was I tried to find as many high percentage looking areas where I could see fish on my electronics, see the bait fish, see everything that was happening. And then during tournament day, I just started rolling all these spots and running them. And what this did is it, one, gave me high confidence that every spot I pull up on, there's a potential I could catch fish. I didn't have this preconceived notion they weren't going to bite. And I've also learned over the years, for example, I fished a brush pile like right here on Lake Dardanelle one day in practice, caught a bunch of fish, and then came back next day and didn't catch them in the tournament, or vice versa. I've actually gone, not got a single bite out of a brush pile in practice, came back during the tournament day, and I caught 15 pounds of fish out of one brush pile. This happens all the time. And I just got to a point where I didn't bother fishing anymore with these certain spots, certain areas. I just rotated the areas that I was able to find, and I would try them with different baits, different things during the tournament day to figure out what was going to get them to bite that specific day. And that's what Brian Thrift does a lot in his tournaments, is he uses his electronics to identify the fish, do all that stuff, never even makes a cast on any of the spots because he knows the fish are there. And if he does make a cast, he'll catch a fish to see what size they are. But then, for example, let's say you're going down a stretch of ledge and you find that there's a little rocky spot here and you pull up and catch a 6-pounder. Well, I'm not going to fish every other rocky spot that's over here to see if there's more 6-pounders on them. Instead, I'm just going to graph for all the rocky spots. Then I'm going to go try to find a new pattern. I'm going to go figure out something different. Maybe I come back in here and start flipping some shallow lily pads or reeds or something. If I get a few bites on a stretch of reeds, then I'm out of there and I'm going to try to find more stretches of reeds that are similar. And I'm going to try to develop a lot of patterns, because even if you pull up here and catch 18 pounds of fish off of these ledges, let's say in practice day, let's say that the day that you fished this spot, the current was ripping on Lake Dardanelle, or the wind was blowing, or there's a lot of factors that could be coming in. Let's say, though, for example, the current is going strong. That happens a lot in Dardanelle. Well, in this stretch of ledges, I know just from experience, when the current is flowing over 25,000 cubic feet per second, you can hammer them right here. If it's not running at all, it is a terrible time to try to get bit here. You can drag a shaky head around and get a bite or two randomly, but instead it's better to head up to the shallow water areas and try to get a few bites flipping or something like that. So it's a lot of times the conditions will change from tournament day or from practice day to tournament day as well, and that just messes you up. So all in all, a lot of times if you're catching 18 pounds of fish in practice, you're hurting yourself because you're doing two things. One, obviously, like Randy said, you're sticking the fish, but also if you only have a limited time to practice, you're restricting the amount of information you can collect during that day. I find that I would much rather get one good bite on a pattern and then try to find a new pattern as opposed to catch 5 fish off of one pattern. And what do you think about that, Randy?
I agree completely on that. I mean, another thing about Thrift there, I mean, back when I was fishing FLW with Thrift, you ought to heard at the pre-tournament meetings, people would they'd call him a sandbagger like crazy because he never would be catching them in practice. You talk to him anytime in practice, oh man, I'm just not catching them. I've had 1 or 2 bites. But that's the way that good fishermen are. Good fishermen, they don't know what's out there. They don't know what they're going to catch because they don't stay in an area, like I said, long enough to know how many bites you're going to get. And I just think that that's one of the most overlooked things that we're talking about there. Just like you said, the conditions change every day. Just like we were talking about the current there, Every single day is a different day on the water. I don't care, if the days are similar. Bass are moving all the time. They're very seldom stationary. They move not only with weather conditions, but they move with fishing pressure. They move with light, intensity as far as how much light's coming into the water. A lot of different things move them in there. The best thing that you can do when you're talking about practicing like this is you just want to get confidence in your area and try to get past that. It's a need we all have. We all want to go into an area and get a bunch of bites, build our confidence up, and say, "Man, I shook off 10 right down this bank here," and it gets you feeling good. It gets your confidence up, but you have to transcend and grow past that, and to be able to fish those areas cold. And once you get confidence in doing that like that, your tournament successes go way up. And not only your tournament successes go way up, but your confidence on the water remains high during competition, because anytime you're dealing with the unknown and you don't know what's ahead of you, your confidence is higher versus if you went in there the day before and rolled down through a good looking area and never got a bite. So that's the whole thing. Bass fishing is such a mental game, and practice is it's a huge mental game in practice.
Yeah, that's great advice there, Randy. Kind of give you guys an example here on Google Earth. Let's just kind of visualize what Randy's talking about. Let's say that, for example, you go down here, and I'm just using this area here in Illinois Bayou and Lake Dardanelle, but it doesn't really matter. Let's just say you fish down the stretch of grass in practice, and you catch 2 3-pounders down this stretch of grass. Then you go down another stretch of grass right here, and you shake off 2 fish. Then you go down this third stretch of grass, and you shake off 2 more fish. Well, man, they're on fire in this stretches of grass. Now, they could be on fire because you fished their first hour of the morning, or maybe the current was flowing, or the wind was blowing. There might be a lot of other factors. But let's say that you get some of those bites. Well, then you come back tournament day, and you fish this stretch of grass, no bites. This stretch of grass, no bites. This stretch of grass, no bites. And now you're like, well, they're not in the grass anymore. Well, no, it's not that they're not in the grass. It's most likely 2 things. One, you maybe stuck all those fish, or someone else in that area stuck those fish, and even getting them to bite and showing their bait basically caused you to not get those bites. But also, the conditions may have just changed enough where this isn't the right bank. Maybe because the wind is blowing from a south direction the day before, it got these grassy banks to fire. But maybe the next day, the wind is blowing from the north, and maybe you need to find some grassy banks that are on the southern shore so you can find some different type of grass that's getting wind blown. Another thing that might happen, though, is that the day you were fishing, maybe you're catching on a chatterbait because it was windy and cloudy. But then the day of the tournament, you find out that it's sunny and calm, and you might need to pitch a jig in there slow or something slower. And because you got so much confidence throwing a chatterbait down this bank in practice, you keep that chatterbait in your hand for 6 hours, never get bit, and now your confidence is shattered, as opposed to getting one bite here in the grass, maybe getting one other bite over here, and then stopping and going and looking for all these other different types of grassy areas, and then going and figuring it out the tournament day, but then also getting some backup patterns in case that doesn't work. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Does that make sense to you, Randy?
That's exactly right, Johnny. Now, I'm not quite at your level, or Johnny has got a technique where he can just go out and just run the lake and not even make a cast in practice and go and fish the tournament. I'm not quite there yet. But I could sit here, guys. I could literally talk for 3 hours on awesome practices I've had that fizzled away the day of the tournament. Now, I'll give you one example on Grand Lake, what happens a few years ago. We were fishing a March tournament down there. It was the first part of March, first or second part of March. Water temperatures were in the low 50s. And the day before the tournament started, I had one of the most epic cranking days I've ever had on that lake. I was catching them shallow cranking, and I was catching them everywhere I went. It's like I'd pull into a cove, I'd pull up on a secondary point, I'd make one cast and catch a 4-pounder. I'd go 2 miles down the lake and pull into a cove and throw a crankbait down the side of a dock and catch another 4-pounder and leave. And I did this all day long. It was unbelievable. And I told myself, it's like, I'm going to win this tournament. The only question is how much I'm going to win it by. Am I going to win it by 10 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever? because I just got dialed in on what they were doing. The first day of the tournament, the next day, I zeroed. I never got a single bite the entire day. And the guys that wound up catching them caught them like on buzz baits in the back of the coves. I mean, the fish moved just that much. So it gets back to this question in practice. It's like, okay, do you change areas or do you change techniques? How long do you stay and how long do you fish an area before you leave? How many fish do you shake off before you leave? There's just a tremendous amount of variables with it, and nobody's got it figured out yet. I mean, there's nobody out there that is like has perfected the art of practicing, because every technique requires a different type of practice. Let's say, for example, we're fishing up at Lake Champlain in June, and we get out on these big flats that are hundreds and hundreds of acres. They're rock flats, that are 4 to 8 foot of water, big boulders everywhere. And there's literally hundreds of acres of this type of area on the same water. You can put your trolling motor down and not take it up off the bottom and never even begin to touch it in a day's fishing. An area like that, you don't really need to shake them off. Yeah, you can catch one and then idle your boat down a couple hundred yards and start fishing again. And then to the other extreme, like I said, when you're fishing isolated targets like that, you got to be really, really sensitive and aware of not to pressure them. So much of it depends on the body of water that you're fishing.
For sure. I think that a lot of guys just go, there's this whole perception that the more fish you catch in practice, the better bites you get, the better you're going to do. And that's what I see a lot of guys think, is that if I catch 16 pounds in practice, I can catch 16 pounds in the tournament. I hardly ever go out and catch a limit of fish in practice, and a good limit of fish in practice whenever I was actually tournament fishing, and then go do that in the tournament. All of my best tournaments were when I would get 1 or 2 good bites, and then I would run around and try to find as much water as possible, and then just figure it out tournament day. Fish the conditions, fish the moment. That's what I would do. That always worked out 10 times better, and that's just, if we're doing tournaments now, that's what I would do. I honestly probably wouldn't even fish that much at all, especially with my electronic stuff. I would just graph the entire day and never even make a cast, because it just would allow me to have a lot more open mind tournament day.
Well, for me, one of the worst things that can happen to me in practice is catching a couple big ones, because if I catch one of those freakishly big ones, like a 7 or 8 pounder, I get so locked in to that's what I need to be doing that most every single time that'll burn you. Yep. Almost every single time. So, man, you just got to be really, really aware. And just like Johnny said, you got to keep an open mind, and you got to fish the conditions as they come. And I'm not saying that, okay, say you're an hour into your day and you got an area that you think that you got a couple bites in and there's a lot of good cover in there. I don't mean go in there and fish for 30 minutes or 45 minutes and they're not biting to pick up and go somewhere else. It's all a judgment call about how you approach that area. But I'll give you guys an example, just like this Grand Lake tournament. I'll sort of let you inside my mind a little bit here, what I'm thinking about. It's like, okay, for me, and we've had 2 days of practice. You got 1 more day of practice left. And I've got a couple variables in my mind. The number one variable is I know how these fish are setting up right now. I know where they're at. And in order to catch them, I have to run a lot of the same type of water. But the problem with that is there's so many boats fishing the same type of water that I'm fishing. A lot of that neutralizes it. A lot of people are fishing the same technique. So when you've got the pattern dialed in and you know what to look for, and I can run down the lake and I can look over there and I say, that's a high percentage area, but there's a boat on it. And then, that's the hardest part of it. So it's so easy to get spun out like that. One of the worst things you can do in practice is let the fishing pressure spin you out. Most of the time, you just have to get in there. You have to slow down. You have to put, you have to have tunnel vision on what you're doing and not really worry what anyone else is doing.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about fishing pressure here in a minute. I want to jump to the second thing, though, Randy, here. A second mistake we see a lot of guys make in practice. And this is, for me, I feel like the most egregious mistake, the biggest mistake that you can make, and that is not covering enough water in practice. This is massive. The thing that I've found just for my own personal fishing consistently, especially now that I'm filming a lot and you're fishing 2 days a week, is that the section of the lake that you're fishing is far more important a lot of times than the bait, the retrieve, anything like that. So, for example, I got Lake Dardanelle pulled up here. You could do this on any lake. But just looking at the Illinois Bayou area, I know that there are days on the Illinois Bayou where I can break this body of water up into several different sections. So you could break it up here maybe to the mouth of the bayou. Then you could break it up into another section where you got the Mill Creek area, you got this zone. You then have the Ouida Bay area over here. This is a whole nother section. And you could break this up into 4 sections, for example. And I see a lot of times guys will get caught up in the fact that there's 4 sections here, and they're going to try to fish everything in all of these sections, and they're going to try to cover this all. Well, what I find is that I might spend 2 hours of my practice day in Illinois Bayou for a tournament. I'll then spend an hour in Dardanelle Bay, maybe 2 hours in Delaware Bay, and then maybe the rest of my time up in Piney Bay. And I'm going to actually try to cover not just these 4 sections in this creek. I'm going to cover this whole area here. I'm then going to cover this whole bay up here. And you're probably wondering, how are you covering all this water? That is so much water to cover in one practice day. Well, the reason I'm able to cover all of these different zones in one practice period is that I'm not fishing everything in every single zone. What I'll do, and this is what I do when I'm fishing, non-tournament stuff too, and I'm just trying to find fish for videos, what I try to do is pick 2 patterns that I feel like for that time of year are going to be highly productive. So, for example, let's say we're going to Lake Dardanelle right now in the spring. I know that in the spring, I can probably catch some fish on a swim jig around grass, or I can catch them flipping a tube or some sort of slower creature bait around some rock, 45-degree rock banks or some riprap. Those are really good patterns in the spring on Dardanelle. So what I'll do is I will sample maybe 1 bank from this section, or 1 bank or maybe 2 banks in this section, spend 5 minutes fishing them in this section of this creek, and I will try to fish maybe 2 grassy stretches, 2 rocky stretches for 5 minutes. I'll spend 20 minutes maybe fishing this section. I'll then spend 20 minutes checking that in this section. So I'll run 2 grassy stretches for 5 minutes, not running like 100 yards of them. Just run like 30, 40 yards of the best looking grass, 30, 40 yards of the best looking riprap. If I don't get bit there, I'm now going to run to this next section over here, spend maybe 20, 30 minutes. And overall, if I spend 30 minutes in each of these sections, it takes me 2 hours to fish the entirety of Illinois Bayou. Now, I might not know exactly what is happening. I might not know all the stretches and all the key areas, but if you get in a good section of the lake, you're going to start getting bit pretty quick. It's not going to take a long time to get bit. And I find that there's usually, in Illinois Bayou alone, there's usually going to be one of these 4 sections that's going to get you more bites over any other section, depending on the season. Now, if I go back in here, maybe if we're fishing in the winter, instead of fishing a swim jig and a tube, I might be going back in the strip pits back in here and spending 20 minutes fishing one of these strip pits with a jerkbait and an Alabama rig. And then there's 2 more strip pits if I want to check those out. Or if it's the summer, I might be out here fishing Main River ledges, and I might be fishing brush piles and then trying to fish some shell beds if I can find them, or whatever it is. And I'm going to try to find as much stuff as I can, or if I'm just graphing, I'll try to graph as much stuff as I can, but spending like 30 minutes in each of these areas. And if we take a look at this area, guys, it's not like it's a small area. This is, if we take this in miles, this is a mile, a 1.5 mile section. This is about a mile section. This is another almost 2 mile section. And then you have a 2 mile section. So I'm covering big chunks of this lake quickly just to try to get a bite. And then what I'll find is that I'll go back into Dardanelle Bay and I'll do all this until I start getting bit consistently with what I'm doing, or at least getting 1 or 2 good bites. Then once I get 1 or 2 good bites, I'm going to try to find as many areas that are similar. So let's say, for example, I roll up here and I roll into Newton Bay and I fish down this short stretch of riprap right here, flipping a tube against the riprap, and I catch a 3.5 to 4 pounder. Well, I'm not going to waste my time fishing all of the other riprap in here. I'm just going to know, okay, there's riprap here, there's riprap down these banks. If I don't know the lake, I'll go find it. And I'll go find all the riprap stretches, spend 10, 15 minutes locating it all. Then I go to the next section and I keep going. And I'm trying to find 2 of these micro sections in these creeks that I can have confidence in. If I can find 2 of these 1 mile sections, whether it's in any of these bays or up in here, and I get 1 pattern there, I now have 2 things to do in the tournament day. I can flip all the riprap in this section of Illinois Bayou, and maybe the other thing I figure out is that I can catch them on a swim jig in the main part here on Piney Bay. And in 8 hours, you're going to be running around, you're going to be burning a lot of gas, you're going to be fishing quick, but I'm not trying to see if I can get bit on every single riprap bank. I'm trying to see what water looks good. And even sometimes, Randy, I'm sure you have this happen too, you get back in an area and it just looks right. You see the shatter kicking, things are just happening. And I might not even get bit in there, but I might just go fish it the tournament day just because it looks good. It just looks like everything is happening. And that's just from instinct. But the more water you cover, the more, one, you can eliminate water, two, you can see where all the fishing pressure is, and three, you can see if there's something weird developing, like maybe there's a shad spawn going on back in this bay that you maybe wouldn't have seen if you didn't go back in there. So there's a lot of advantages of covering a ton of water and not getting caught up in trying to fish every inch of every single bank. What are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Well, I think what Johnny's talking about is what I classify or call indicator areas, indicator spots. And one of the things, guys, you really have to get a full grasp of what an indicator area or an indicator spot is. And let me share my screen. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, while we share that, Randy, one question from T Fishing says, how do you know when catching one fish is a pattern? A lot of times that has to come from experience. Like for myself, I've fished enough in all these different patterns that when I get bit doing something, I'm pretty confident that I can replicate that just off of past experience. So maybe if you don't know what the patterns are that are good, you don't have the confidence, you maybe need to maybe take a little bit extra time. Again, Randy and I have 15 plus years of, Randy has 30 plus years, I have 15 plus years of fishing experience, and like tournament style fishing experience for myself. Randy has 30 years, even though I was just fishing youth tournaments, but same mentality. You learn how to pick up on that stuff over time. I'm sure some of you guys can understand. Does that make sense to you, Randy, picking up on it?
Oh yeah, I think that all of us, we would like to say the first fish we catch through the day is going to lock us into the pattern, and we don't have to work or look for any farther. But that's rarely the case. Mm-hmm. I mean, very seldom is the first fish you catch of the day, or very seldom can you make a pattern on one fish. I mean, it happens, but it's very unlikely.
And that's why a lot of times it's good to find different stuff, check different areas, as opposed to just trying to get one. Because sometimes you can't pattern that area. There's not enough water there. There's a bunch of different factors. Can you share your screen, Randy? I can't see it on your end.
Okay. You see it there, Johnny?
Yep, got it.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about indicator spots. Okay, what an indicator spot is, guys, it's what I consider a place that if there's bass in an area, say for example this creek right here, this right here is the largest creek in the gravelly arm of Lake of the Ozarks. So you know that this creek has got a lot of bass in it. It's the biggest creek. It's got the most cover. You know, a lot of tournaments guys do good in tournaments here. There's just a lot of fish in here. So in every one of these places like this, when you got a major creek or a big bay or something like that, there's places in there called indicator places that I call that will allow you to eliminate water really quickly. Say for example, we're at Lake of the Ozarks and it's the end of February, and I know the fish are going to be on a rig or a jerkbait. I can run back in here and I can hit like maybe this point here, this point right here, maybe this point right here. And if I don't catch a fish on those 3 points right there, which are three of the best looking points in this section of the creek, that's a good indicator that I don't need to fish any of the rest of the creek, other points in the creeks, because, you know, this point right here, it's not quite as defined. It's a little bit rounded. Say, for example, if I caught one here, then I came over here and caught one here, then I would expand and I'd fish the more subtle stuff, like these little rounded point here, something like this, you know, the more inobvious type stuff. And what this does, this allows you to cover a lot of water in a hurry, because you don't have to go back in here and fish everything. For example, you come in here, you fish 3 of the indicator points with a jerkbait. If you don't get bit, you make a switch. The next thing you do is you go back and you maybe, you know, flip some of the docks towards the back of the coves back in here. Flip maybe 2 or 3 of the back ends there. If you get bit, you can duplicate that around the lake. If you don't get bit, move on to the next something else. And if you roll in on those areas that look really good and don't get bit on them, that's a good indicator that you're not going to be able to expand that technique or the pattern into different areas. And I think a lot of times, one of the biggest mistakes I think guys would make is that they may run to the back of this creek here and they just start fishing every point on their way out of the creek. Even if they're not getting bit, they're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to pull up in one point and they're going to be stacked on there. Very seldom does that happen. If the bass will tell you if the area is alive or not. And if you've got a good area, whether it be a cove or a creek or whatever, an area that's capable of producing a high finish in the tournament, you're going to get bit on that prime looking stuff. You're not going to roll through that prime looking stuff and not get bit. 99% of the time, I can tell you that. So you're looking for areas that have bass on the obvious stuff, like this type point here, and the more inobvious stuff like this right here. That signifies a really good area.
Great stuff. And Randy, one question we had over here from let's see here, it was from Terry, and I answered on the stream, but basically he asked, will you make a pattern if you catch a bunch of dinks? Do you count dinks, like little small fish, as a pattern? Personally, I don't like doing that. I've been burned by that a lot over the years. I find I want to be catching at least 2 to 2.5 pound bass. Really, 2.5 pound bass for me is like a good indicator that there's some good quality fish there. I don't necessarily care if I'm getting 6 pound bites, but if I'm getting a 2.5 pound bite, that tells me there's a good chance there's also going to be 4 pounders, 5 pounders in that area. If I'm getting a bunch of 12 or 14 inchers, a lot of times that is not a great sign, because I don't know. I've never had a lot of luck, Randy, where I go catch a bunch of 12 inchers in practice, then go back and catch a bunch of 5 pounders later on. It just never seems to work out that well. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely so. And here's this, just like what Jonny was saying, guys, if you roll through an area and you start catching multiple small fish, when I'm talking small, I'm talking like, 8 to, say the length limit is 15 inches. If you're catching these 8 to 13 inch bass and you're catching them fairly regularly, that's a sign you need to either change techniques or areas or both. I mean, a prime example is yesterday at Grand. I rolled through this one area. I was shallow cranking, and I caught like 6 or 7, 12, 13 inchers. And I ran other water just like that and just caught 12 or 13 inchers. So if you're not catching, quality fish, you need to really carefully weigh your approach as far as your area and your technique or both on that.
For sure. Cool. We got 2 more mistakes to go through, but one thing I wanted to talk about really quick, guys, we got to do our shameless plugs. It's how we pay the bills for the live stream and the podcast. And if you guys want to learn a little bit more about which patterns of fish in tournament, especially coming up here in the post-spawn, which is right around the corner, head over to fishthemoment.com and check out our virtual seminars page. One seminar we're doing here in a couple weeks is our post-spawn tournament pattern seminar. It's going to be next Thursday. Not this upcoming Thursday, but the week after. And in this seminar, Randy and I are going to be talking about our top patterns for catching post-spawn bass, both offshore and shallow. I'll be covering the offshore patterns. Randy will be covering the shallow patterns. And these are the patterns that I was talking about earlier, guys, when I was saying that I pick 2 patterns when I go to the lake, and I run them in a bunch of different sections of the lake. Based on the water clarity, water visibility, all the conditions, I know which patterns I need to be fishing to do well in a tournament or to catch good fish. There's usually just a handful that work in each type of lake, each situation. And that's what we're going to teach you in this class. We're going to put highly detailed graphics together. We basically try to give you all the information, all the nitty-gritty details, and we spend a ton of time putting the slides together, putting the information together, probably 20, 30 hours just on the slides alone, not just coming up with the content either. So a ton of time into these presentations, these seminars. It's a 3-hour seminar, and you can check them out over on fishthemoment.com. And this is going to be an awesome one, Randy. Any comments on this?
That, guys, this post-spawn seminar is going to be freaking packed full of info. I'm telling you right now, because we could do an entire 3 hours on just shallow or deep. So we're going to give you all the juice on offshore stuff. I'm going to be a student just like you guys are. I'm going to tune in to see what Johnny's got to say about this offshore post-spawn deal. And I'm going to give you all my secrets and all my tips on fishing shallow during the post-spawn in different phases of the post-spawn. Because there's actually, in my opinion, there's 3 different phases of the post-spawn. There's the early post-spawn, the mid part, and the late. And when you're talking about shallow water personality and mood of the bass, every single period of the post-spawn, the bass are in a different mood with a different personality. Same with offshore. going to be info pack 3 hours, man.
Yeah, and that's why we're going to get the graphics to you guys. You'll get slides you can actually take home in a PDF with all the patterns in a one-pagers. You get a one-pager with all the patterns. I'll pull that up here in a second here, guys, just to kind of show you what one of those one-pagers looks like. I'm going to pull this up actually over here so you guys can see it. While we're doing that too, I also have you guys check out some of our lake breakdowns. If you guys are interested in getting a little more detailed help on where to fish in your lake, we offer lake breakdowns with 40 GPS waypoints that Randy picks out. We give area descriptions, details on the lake, and we give you instructions on how to download these waypoints straight to your fish finder. We have these lake breakdowns on lakes all across the country, and we break them up by seasons. So you have spring, winter, fall. We'll be working on summer maps too pretty soon. And then we also have our personal lake breakdowns if we don't have your lake broken down already. So that's it. Anything there, Randy, you wanted to touch on with the breakdowns? You spend so many hours a week working on those. It's crazy.
Yeah, these breakdowns take a long time to put together, guys. And we've been literally swamped with the personal breakdowns. They fill up as soon as they come out every Monday. And we're breaking down lakes. And we've been breaking down 500-acre lakes. Guys out west have small lakes, so it doesn't matter how big your lake is. We can break it down and give you guys some tips and advice on how to attack it and approach it.
Yeah, and here's a little sneak peek, guys, on what some of these patterns can actually look like, just so you get a sense of what we're talking about with these patterns, the detail we give. So, for example, here's for our post. This is from our newsletter. We give a few of these little sneak peeks, but this is what you're going to get, guys, is these key factors with all different baits, the key structures, cover. But then in addition to this is kind of your cheat sheet. We're also going to spend a ton of time digging into all the other nuances and details, showing you on contour maps, showing you on Google Earth, all the different factors you need to know, how to modify your baits, all these different things. And we're just going to rip through as many of these patterns as possible. Boom, 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 boom. So this is kind of what you're going to be getting. There's a ton of slides on this, ton of other information too, just on basics of post-spawn bass fishing, what to focus on, how these windows and things change, how weather affects all these things. It is going to be info pack, like Randy says. So definitely check out the breakdown or the virtual seminars over on fishmoment.com if you guys are interested. And it's the post-spawn tournament breakdown or post-spawn tournament seminars. So that is that. So let's jump back. Shameless plug over. Thank you guys for always hanging in through those, and also for supporting us on the website. We could not be doing what we're doing without you, and it's the only way we monetize this or pretty much everything we do. All the YouTube videos, all the time we put in. The website is the biggest thing, so we really appreciate everyone who supports us there. Awesome. So let's see here. Let us jump into the next mistake that anglers make while they're practicing. The fourth mistake, and this is another really big one, Randy, is, and we kind of touched on it a tiny bit earlier, is anglers will fish practice using the conditions that they face in practice rather than fishing practice with the conditions they're going to face in the tournament. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you go out to the lake on a Friday before your Saturday tournament and you have windy, cloudy conditions, you might go out and throw a buzzbait and just hammer them in practice. But then the next day, if you get a bright bluebird sky, post front, no wind, it's going to be very different, and those fish are not going to be set up in the same locations. So if you're practicing if you're in your practice day and you're running down every single grassy bank, throwing a buzzbait and hammering them, catching 20-pound bag of fish, there's a very, very small chance you're going to be able to do that the next day because the conditions completely changed. So instead, you might want to actually ignore all those fish that are up on the bank chewing and find another way to catch them, locate some some areas that are going to be better for the future conditions. The reason I think this is a big issue, Randy, this is less of an issue of maybe guys not wanting to do this. It's that it's not fun to not catch fish. That is the biggest thing I see with guys who try to fish tournaments. Tournament fishing is different from just fun fishing. I think that if you want to be a successful tournament fisherman, you have to change your mindset completely. And that's why I really don't like fishing tournaments that much anymore, Randy, because when you go tournament fishing, it's a job. You're trying to do something. You're trying to win. You're trying to compete. And to compete, to prepare for something that you're trying to compete in, you can't just go into it just lackadaisical and expect to do well. Now, you might just get lucky, or you might be able to just have a decent day. But if you really want to succeed in tournaments, you have to give up on the idea that you're going into your practice day to catch fish and have fun. You're not going there to go catch 20 pounds in a buzzbait because the conditions are perfect. You have to ignore that you can go catch 20 pounds in the buzzbait, go to maybe some offshore areas or maybe some deeper stretches at boat docks, figure out all the nuances there, and even if you don't get bit during your practice day, that's where the fish are going to move to during the tournament. And you have to basically give up on having fun during practice. I think that's the biggest challenge for a lot of guys is they don't want to put in the prerequisite effort or take the sacrifice in their practice day because they see it as a fun fishing day to actually do well in the tournament. Would you agree with that?
No doubt. I agree completely with that. This is a pretty complex topic when you're talking about that. And a lot of it just has to do with, there's a lot of different factors involved as far as the technique you're using, because there are certain techniques that are more fragile than others as far as weather goes when you're talking about fishing for upcoming conditions. I learned this the hard way, guys, and here's a prime example. It took me a long time to get past this, and I think this is one of the biggest things that guys starting out struggle with is they don't pay enough attention to the weather, and because they don't have an understanding of what the weather does to certain type of bites. There's certain techniques and there's certain baits that are just a lot more severely impacted negatively or positive by weather changes. And a prime example, one of the hardest lessons that took me years to learn was a floating worm. I can't tell you how many springtime tournaments where I was just wrecking them in practice on a floating worm. I mean, this was back before people started throwing floating worms a lot. And there was a handful of us that had it ourselves. I'm talking, guys, we would have these days with warm south wind, not much warm south wind, pretty light winds, water temperatures in the 60s. And you would see these big ones come up all day long on the floating worm and get it. But what happens is something's fixing to change. Anytime that you're on a bite that seems to be too good to believe, you can bet something's going to change. Because bass don't bite good all the time. So if you're on a tremendous bite and you can basically just get ready, something's going to change. So with the floating worm anyway, I've had so many tournaments where I was on them in practice, and I was on them so good that I committed to it 100%. And what I tried to do is I tried to figure out the color they wanted, the retrieve, the depth, the area of the lake. I tried to just specialize it to where I had more places than anyone. What happened most every single time that went down, a front was on the way. And when a front comes in, when you have a north wind that comes in the spring and it has been a south wind, it kills the floating worm bite. You might as well not even take it out of your rod locker, because those fish may come up and look at it, but they won't hit it most of the time. And that's what we're talking about. A floating worm is very susceptible to weather changes. But if you're talking about something like a jig or a wacky rig or a Texas rig, football head jig, something like that, those bottom bouncing techniques, those are the techniques that are more stable under a wide range of conditions. And here's a prime example. That's the difference between Rick Clunn and Larry Nixon. Clunn has had a lot of wins, but he's had a lot of bombs at the same time. Larry Nixon is like steady all the time. That's because Clunn fishes moving baits, power baits, spinner baits, crank baits all the time, which are real susceptible to the personality of the bass changing under different weather conditions. And Larry Nixon, all he does is drag a worm or a Cinco all the time. And those fish are less affected, by that type of bite. So what the biggest advice I can give you guys on this is, when you're practicing, even before you start practicing, become a weather geek. Get on Weather Underground, study what the 10-day forecast is. Look what the weather's been preceding from the time you're getting in there. How much the water clarity's changed recently, if the lake's coming up or down, or if it's stable, what the water temperatures were. You really have to study the weather, because that will give you an idea of how you need to practice. And let's say, for example, like right now, say for example, we're, like we have like right now, it's a warm south wind. We've had 75-degree days here in Missouri. It's really warm. The fish are pushing up shallow. But the first day of the tournament here, it's supposed to rain tomorrow. It's supposed to bluebird off the first day of the tournament. And so I'm practicing for those bluebird conditions on Thursday. Anything that I catch right now is a bonus, because I'm not fishing for what that weather is going to be like tomorrow. I'm not going out tomorrow trying to catch fish under the rain conditions that we're going to have tomorrow. In fact, I don't even want to catch fish on techniques that work during the rain. I want to stay with techniques that I know are going to produce in the tournament. So biggest advice I can give you guys is this is what takes time. You have to, and it's where experience comes in. You have to learn which lure categories are more susceptible to being impacted by weather changes and which ones are not. And then gear that around your pre-tournament practice based upon what the weather's going to be for each one of those tactics and techniques.
Yeah, it's great stuff right there, Andy. And this is kind of a real quick, just kind of illustrate what Randy was talking about. Here's the weather actually for Grove, Oklahoma for his tournament. And if we take a look right here, you can actually see the weather. This is I don't know what that is, but there's a hat popping up. But basically tomorrow, like Randy said, thunderstorm, 64 degrees. Tomorrow, probably, you're going to absolutely wreck them in practice. I'm sure a lot of guys are going to catch them on a spinnerbait, a chatterbait, a crankbait, and they're going to be feeling really good about themselves going into the tournament because they crushed them. And today it was a really windy, nice day as well. Well, you're going to have post-front conditions on Thursday, and then you're going to have second day after front conditions, which are even worse conditions. And what that'll do a lot of times with this post-front happening, one, you're seeing there's not going to be a lot of drop in temperature. So that's something to think about. The temperature's not dropping, so it's not going to be this cold front that's going to pull the fish off the bank. It's just going to make it so that maybe they're not as aggressive, but you still have some wind. So you might be able to catch them on maybe not as fast-moving spinnerbait, but you might be able to catch them on a square bill. Then the next day you have barely any wind. Really warm skies, though. This is probably going to be a great Senko, shaky head, jig day, and then it's going to go back to normal. And that's kind of what Randy's talking about with these different weather patterns. And we have a seminar on fishthemoment.com that actually is how weather affects bass. There's so much that goes into it. I actually have a 3-hour seminar dedicated just to that, of how the wind, current, all that stuff affects bass. I'll be doing that seminar again in a couple of months. We rotate those every few months. The last one sold out, so that was good. But we're going to hopefully do that one again. But, that's the thing, guys, is that practicing is not just figuring out where to fish, not just figuring out what bait to fish. It's predicting, forecasting what the fish are going to be doing the day of the actual tournament. And that's something that I think a lot of guys mess up when they're practicing, is they focus on today. They focus on their practice day, and they just assume, which kind of is silly, but they just assume that what they do today is going to work tomorrow. Never, ever, ever goes that way. And in my experience, the less that you fish in practice, the less you get dialed into one bait, the less you get dialed into one type of pattern, and the more you just run around and find new areas, kind of sample a little bit of everything, the better you can adjust, because you're not stubborn. You're not having this confidence that one bait is working better than another when it may just be a fluke. Does that make sense, Randy?
It makes perfect sense. The hardest thing to do in tournament fishing, in my opinion, is to give up on something that's been working good. I mean, that is so hard to do. If you've got a technique that you're really confident in and you feel that nobody else has got on it and it's produced some quality fish for you in practice, it is so difficult to let that go. I mean, It really is. I've been there. I understand how hard that is, but this is what comes with time on the water and experience. It's the age-old question in fishing that fishermen ask themselves all the time. It's like, do I stay or do I leave? You have to do that. And just like what Jonny said, I think a lot of people get locked into getting so laser focused on how their practice is going, and they want to cover every area like with a fine-tooth comb. You just got to fish with just a free, open mind. I asked Larry Nixon one time. It was when I fished with him. I fished with Larry at Truman Lake. It was 1989, and this is when Larry was at the top of his game. And I drew him out at the tournament up there, and I just wanted to learn from the guy. And I asked him, and I ask all these guys, these superstars, questions all day long. I said, Larry, what's the most important thing in your mind to doing good in tournaments? And he thought about it, and he goes, you just have to fish like you just don't give a crap how it's going to go. And what he means by that is if you go out there and you fish like you just don't really care, it takes all that pressure away from you. It takes those knots, they leave your stomach, because it doesn't matter if you don't catch one, so what? If you catch them, great. And that shift that he's talking about is so critical. Some of the best days that I've had usually follow up some of the worst days I've had before that. I can't count how many tournaments where I had them dialed in practice. I get out there the first day of the tournament and I just suck. I catch one or two. The second day of the tournament, I'm so far out of it. I got nothing to lose. I've got to catch a mega bag just to get a check. And I'll go out and I'll catch a mega bag simply because I just don't care. I just go out there. I'm open. I'll sit down on the boat for 10 minutes and tie up a jig skirt that may or may not work. And I just fish open and I fish loose. And that is another thing. I'm telling you guys to do this, but it's another one of those things that's so hard to do because we are always looking at that clock all the time.
It's all mental. The tournament fishing is a lot more mental than skill and stuff like that. The guys give it credit for. It's a lot of overcoming your own mental doubts when you're on the lake for 8 hours. It's coming up with a strategy. It can be very stressful and it can also be very rewarding. And that's the thing about tournament, like the high level tournament anglers, it doesn't get talked about. Yeah, they have the skills. They know what the patterns are. They know all this stuff. But they also can overcome the inner demons. And they can, if they don't have a fish at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they're doing it 3, they're able to then figure out a way to put 5 fish in the boat on those bad days to salvage a day, salvage a tournament, salvage a paycheck. That's the key to being a good tournament angler, is always being able to kind of overcome when you're having struggles, losing fish, missing fish. And you need basically a sports psychologist to figure all that stuff out, honestly.
Yeah, the best days you have on the water are the days that you don't have much to lose. I mean, for me, the worst, one of the worst things to be in a position wise in a tournament is if they take the top 10 to make the final day cut, or they take the top 50 to get a check. If I'm on that bubble, like if I'm like within 2 or 3 places of the bubble on either side, that is so much pressure, and you tend to fish so conservatively that you don't give yourself that opportunity to catch a big bag. But if you're leading the tournament or if you're down in the pack a ways, that it just loosens you up a little bit. And nobody likes to be down in the pack. I mean, nobody does. I mean, everybody likes to be in the game and, in position to win or finish high every single day. So I don't like to be in that position. I hate to be in the position where I'm just, going to try to hit a home run, because it doesn't happen all the time.
For sure. We got one more mistake. This is another one that's very overlooked, and I want to talk about that. But one thing I do want to mention, guys, is that Randy and I are going to go back to doing some of the Randy versus Jonny challenges. And one video we're going to do this next week that I kind of want to get your input on is we want to do a video about either fishing a floating worm or fishing a mag draft swim bait or a bigger swim bait. And we're going to go do a challenge where we're going to get that bait. The idea is that here in April, we're going to do a challenge where we're going to pick a bait in Randy's wheelhouse. Now I'm going to have to go up to the bank, or I'm going to have to figure out some way to catch him on these baits that I don't ever throw. And then we're going to switch it up for the next month, and we're going to give Randy a flutter spoon or a hair jig or something Randy just never throws either. And we're going to kind of see how we can compete out of our comfort zones. But we want to ask you guys what you think about that for this video. Do you guys leave it in the comment or in the chat? Do you want us to go against each other with floating worms, or go against each other with the big mag draft swim baits, 6 and 8 inch swim baits? Let us know over in the chat, and then we will make that video next week. Awesome. So last mistake that we see a lot of anglers make, and this is something that's going to be big for you, Randy, in this upcoming tournament on Grand, is that a lot of anglers forget to adjust their practice strategy based on fishing pressure, or adjust their tournament strategy due to fishing pressure. This is something that I know you're dealing with right now, Randy, where there's a ton of anglers who are on Grand Lake right now, both practicing and also especially fun fishing as we get later towards the weekend. And Grand Lake's just covered up with boats. Every pocket has 10 boats in it. And it's very, very tough to catch fish in those situations, because you feel like you can't get bit behind other anglers. When someone fishes on a bank in front of you, you feel like, oh, I can't catch fish there because they just fished there. To be a good tournament angler, you have to get over that, one, and you have to figure out how to adjust to that as well. So one example, I'm just going to use another Lake Dardanelle example, is I won a junior state championship on Lake Dardanelle when I was like 17 years old. It was for junior Bassmaster, so don't take too much weight into it. It was just a state championship for juniors, but basically there was a bunch of tournaments this weekend. There was like 4 other adult, I call them adult, but regular tournaments on that same weekend, and I ended up catching 18 pounds and also jumped off a like 4.5 to 5 pounder at the boat, weighed in a 13 incher, and I should have had about 23 pounds. I would have won every single tournament that day if I had landed that fish, but I would have been the top 3 in every tournament that day, plus I won the tournament that I had. This is competing against team tournament guys. So what I was doing was I knew that there were a bunch of fish setting up on these bridges, right on the corners of these bridges, and in the kind of these grass mats that were leading in just off the edge of these bridges. I figured it out in practice, and there were a bunch of these stretches that were really good. For example, like, right in here, on these bridges. The problem was that every other angler in Russellville, Arkansas, and then their brother, sister, and uncle all were fishing these banks and all the other banks in here. Well, what I figured out was that if I fished these little key stretches right here, I would get bigger bites. And I kind of got that dialed in a little bit in practice where I got my biggest bites on these type of areas. The problem was because everyone was fishing in front of me and behind me and around me, it's very, very hard to actually get bit because there's so many other anglers. So I had to take a different approach. What I did is I picked up a bait that a lot of guys weren't throwing. It's a 4.5-inch flipping tube with a big loud rattle in it. And I would fish down these banks, these little sections like this, as slow as a snail. So I would basically put my boat out here maybe 20 or 30 feet away from the bank, pitch my tube up to the bank, and drag it off the bank super duper slow. And I would pull it off the bank further than anyone else was fishing as well. And I found that by fishing that tube with the rattle in it really slow, I could fish behind anybody and catch fish. It didn't matter. I could go behind any angler and I could get bit. And I didn't care if there were other fishermen around. And that was kind of one of the keys is I figured out the perfect bait. Not maybe it was the perfect bait, but it was just a different bait that no one was throwing. Another example is on Lake Dardanelle. Again, it was when I won that college regional championship. I have some good success on Lake Dardanelle. But when I had that college regional championship, there was a spot over here that was just getting absolutely hammered. There must have been 30 different boats that fished it, seemed like that day. Like it was just like a Ferris wheel where you had to get your ticket and then take your turn going on the ride. And there was a real roadbed that runs this creek channel here, and everyone was fishing it. Big community hole. Well, I basically fished all my other spots that were sneaky, and I had like 16 pounds, 17 pounds in the boat, and I needed to get an upgrade. And all these other guys were fishing these areas, and I knew most people were fishing deep diving crankbaits, 10-inch worms, football jigs, just other stuff. And what I did is I picked up a bait that I knew no one was throwing at that time. This is back in 2013 before the hair jig was really known. I picked up a hair jig, threw it in this spot, caught a 4.5 pounder and made a cull after about 10 guys had fished this spot. And then right after I left, about 10 more guys probably fished it before the end of the day. And I would talk to a few guys who were in the tournament and stuff, and they're like, I told them they saw me catch that fish, and I told them what I was doing, and they said they hadn't seen anyone catch a fish on that spot all day, and everyone had fished it. And it was just that I used a little bit of a unique bait, but I knew I could go behind everyone and throw that hair jig and get extra bites. And I basically was able to put all the fishing pressure out of my mind, not worry about it, and still get bit regardless. And that's how I always found was successful for me in tournaments, is I always thought about what is the bait that no one else is throwing? And I found the best area. I focused on area first. I didn't care about what bait was right. I needed to find the areas that had the big fish. That's more important than anything. But once I felt like I had an area or some sort of pattern dialed in, I then picked up a bait that I felt like no one else was throwing, so that way I could go behind people. So that's kind of what I was thinking. What do you think, Randy?
Yeah, that if you can find the key little bait, that is the deal. I mean, because not only it helps your confidence out, there's nothing that will boost your confidence thinking that you've got a bait nobody else is throwing, and there's nothing that makes it more difficult to fish in a crowd of people if you know you're fishing the same bait everybody else is. That is miserable unless they're just absolutely biting it like crazy. So there's a couple of different things for me. Like I said, I agree with Jonny on that little tweaking a bait is the key, whether it be color, profile, some little secret bait is a big deal. The second thing is like your casting angles have a big part of it, how you approach the water. The timing is a big part of it too. And a lot of it is not slopping through an area. When you're in an area that has getting a lot of fishing pressure, you cannot just slop through it. You've got to roll into those areas smooth, quiet. You can't come in too hot. You can't come in too slow. You have to really spend a lot of time learning how to use your trolling motor as far as coming in on that piece of cover at the right pace, not too fast, not too slow. It's not a matter of too fast or slow. It's the right pace for the cover that you're fishing. that's the big key. It's like when you're dealing with angle and bait and color, I mean, that's the big thing that's going to give you an advantage over everybody else. And also, if you go into an area and you know that this area is getting a lot of fishing pressure and you spend a lot of time in there and you learn all the subtleties within that area. Say you got one big bay, and you find out you go in there and there may be some docks in there, and you find out the docks that's got a little Christmas tree underneath the walkway here or there, or there may be a little piece of steel pipe or concrete against the bank that's barely under the water. The more time that you get intimate with the area that you're fishing, the better you're going to be off. Because one of the things that I always told myself for so many years, and I still do, is if I get into an area that I know there's a bunch of fish in and it's got the potential for me to spend my entire tournament in, I stay in there in practice, and I may not even fish it, but I study the area with a fine-tooth comb. And I want to go out of that area and say, I know this area better than anyone in this tournament. It doesn't matter who's in this tournament. It doesn't matter who comes into this bay or this creek. I'm going to catch as many or more bass than they do because I know it better. So that will give you a big confidence boost. And it's all about confidence. You got to build your confidence up in whatever way that you can do it.
Yeah, one thing, big call out there, guys, is when Randy's talking about learning those areas really well, this is when you're doing 2 to 4 days of practice for a tournament as well, Randy, right? Not just like if you were practicing 1 day for a tournament, you wouldn't be able to obviously learn an area well enough because the problem with that is if you try to learn one area really, really well, if you pick an area that sucks, then you're screwed. That's a bad deal. So it maybe if you had 3 days of practice, you could spend 2 days looking at everything, and you could spend your last day really learning one area that you feel like has a lot of potential. That works with 3 days of practice. With 1 day of practice, I would not recommend at all getting super intimate with a specific area because that can burn you way more than it can help you. Having more areas is always better in general when you're doing a 1 day derby or 1 day tournament because it's very, very rare that you find one area in practice and it automatically works tournament day and the fish are just there and you're catching them. Those are the great days. Those are the days that work. That's very, very rare, though, unless you're, really dialed down the lake and you fish it a ton. If you just go to a lake you haven't fished in 6 months, have 1 day of practice, and just go out there, look at as much of the lake as possible, and then just try to dial it in tournament day. Would you agree there, Randy?
Yeah, I agree with that. And a lot of it depends on the lake that you're fishing. Because if you're fishing like at Sam Rayburn Lake and you know that there's a giant grass bed out in the beach basin that the pre-spawn bass are using, you may have to spend more time in there because you're getting bit all over the grass bed. You need to find out the key areas with that grass bed. But like you said, if you're fishing one creek that's got some isolated wood, isolated targets, and there's not a lot of cover that will hold a big population of bass, you're exactly right. So that's just a judgment call based upon the body of water that you're fishing as far as the potential that area has to sustain a number of boats over a day's course of time or multiple days.
For sure. Seems like Mag Draft is winning out a little bit over Floating Worm. It's kind of tough. We're going to have to do a poll or something, Randy, I think it's like almost a dead even tie. I wasn't expecting it to be this close. I'm going to have to tally up the results, it looks like. Which would you prefer to fish? Which one do you think you could kick my butt in more? Maybe you shouldn't say because anyone's going to vote for that. But what do you think you have the advantage on, the floating worm or the swim bait?
The floating worm is one of my favorite all-time lures to fish. I just love fishing a floating worm.
Well,
we'll get more bites on a floating worm, but we're not going to get near the bites on a mag draft. But they might be some better fish.
Well, I have caught about 6 fish total on a floating worm and about 7 fish total on the mag draft. So, it's gonna be rough for me either way. I'm gonna be in for some pain.
I think you're in trouble if we go with the floating worm.
Oh God! Now everyone's spamming floating worm. God!
I only say that because I know that if I was on the football head jig, I know I'm in trouble with Johnny. But he's probably in trouble with the floating worm.
Well, I'm sticking you with an 8-inch Magnum flutter spoon later this summer as a payback there.
Get back at me.
I don't think you can flip an 8-inch Magnum flutter spoon in a laydown, Randy. I don't think that'll work. Oh man. Okay, well, it looks like floating worm now is the winner. So we're gonna do a floating worm.
Oh man.
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I have any floating worms. I mean, I do. I could throw. I'm gonna have to figure this out. I'm gonna have to do some YouTube videos. Watch Randy Blockett Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett. How to set up a floating worm secrets.
I've got about 5,000 of them. I'll bring them when we go, so you don't have to buy any. I'll get you set up.
Thank goodness. I need to find those methylate ones. I know that's the deal, right? Or do you throw methylate, or what's your color on the floating worm?
It totally depends on the conditions: water temperature, water clarity, and sunlight. I mean, I throw. I did a video on floating worms. You guys saw my floating worm box in my YouTube video. I've got every color under the rainbow in there.
Oh man. Okay, well, I'm gonna have 12 different floating worms. I'm gonna be so spun out. I'm colorblind too, just like you, Randy. So I'm gonna be picking up worms. I won't even know if they're different colors. I'm just gonna keep picking them up and just throw them. I don't even know. This is gonna be a nightmare. I catch them on a fluke really well, so hopefully my knowledge of catching fish on a fluke will translate to a floating worm.
If you can catch them on a fluke, you can catch them on a floating worm.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better.
It's the same bite.
Okay. Good deal. Anyways, guys, that's pretty much what we have for practice. One thing as a reminder for you guys, if you are interested in trying to figure out some of these patterns that we're talking about to get better in tournaments, head over to fishthemoment.com. This is where we have our virtual seminars. And if you check out the virtual seminars page, you can check our upcoming post-spawn tournament pattern seminar. Randy and I are going to be giving up all of our juice, all of our best patterns for catching fish in the post-spawn. I'll be talking about offshore patterns. Randy will be talking about shallow water patterns. There's so many ways to catch fish in the post-spawn that we are going to struggle to get all the information into one 3-hour seminar. So we're going to make sure the graphics are on point, everything is buttoned up so we can get as much information packed into one seminar. I think, Randy, this is going to be by far the most information-packed seminar we're ever going to have, because post-spawn tournament fishing, there's so much to cover. Would you agree?
Yeah, it is. The probably the best one we had before this was the jig seminar, but this one, there's just so much to it. It's going to be a big deal. I mean, because it's a pretty complex time of year to fish. There's a lot of options out there.
For sure. So yeah, definitely check that out. And then also check out our lake breakdowns too, if you guys want to get some GPS waypoints for your local lakes, 4 GPS waypoints, area descriptions, and summaries of the lake. We give you instructions on how to transfer these waypoints to your fish finder, and we have lake breakdowns for every season on a ton of different lakes that Randy breaks down. So yeah, that is that. One thing that a couple questions. Ed asking, Johnny, what happened to your Thursday YouTube videos? I had major computer issues, guys. My computer crashed, and it's the worst time for my computer to crash because right now, Bitcoin, if you know anything about that, people are mining Bitcoin using high-tech editing computers, and so you can't find any of the components for them. So I had to order a computer from a manufacturer, and they're building it, and it's a whole thing, and it's more expensive than I wanted to spend, and it's not getting here till April 22nd. So I'm kind of editing off of loaner equipment right now, so YouTube production is kind of slowed down, but once we get the new computer back, we'll be coming back full steam. I have a video coming out this Friday. I kind of bumped it to Fridays now. I want to get it back to Thursdays, but for the time being, we're going to be posting on Fridays, and I'm just going to try to get out as many videos as I can without my full setup. So bear with me on that. And then Randy, you have plenty of content for them over at Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett. 3 videos a day practically. So definitely check out that. But yeah, the Fish Moment videos are coming up. The one I'm doing this week, Randy, I'm excited about. It's how to catch fish in shallow water with your electronics. So like, how do you use your electronics to catch fish in 5 feet of water, but like in offshore areas? Very sneaky deal. I'm going to be giving up so much juice in this video. I was like not sure if I wanted to make it, but I feel like you guys deserve it. So I'm making this video. I probably should make a seminar about it, but I feel like it's too niche for a seminar. So I'm just going to give you the info for free, because that's what we do at Fish the Moment. We give away the juice for free most of the time. Yeah. Anyways, how anything else, Randy?
Yeah, just thanks again for tuning in, guys. Appreciate you taking an hour or so out of your evening to join us here. Much appreciated. And I'm going to get some sleep and get back on the road and hope we catch some more fish or get some stuff figured out down there tomorrow at Grand.
For sure. Definitely good luck in the tournament. And also prayers go out to Jimmy Houston's wife. Sounds like she had a stroke. So just prayers to Jimmy's wife. Hopefully everything goes there. Keep her in your prayers, guys, tonight, if you guys have a time to think about it. So, but Randy, safe travels in the tournament. Best of luck. Hopefully you're going to be bringing big bags of fish across the scales. And we'll all be watching. No pressure.
Sounds good.
Guys,
We'll talk
thanks.
about it next week, man.
Oh yeah, we'll do a whole post-tournament breakdown. We have some cool stuff coming up potentially next week or next few weeks too. We have someone who might be coming in to refute your live scope position, to do a little friendly discussion / argument on your live scope position. So hopefully that will be yeah.
That's going to be interesting, man. I'll be doubling down. You know me.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I don't know. I'm going to be the moderator on that. I don't want to get in between these two powerhouses over here. It's going to be interesting. You guys are going to like it. Sparks are going to be flying. Randy might change his mind. I don't know. One of these days, it's going to be a non-April Fool's video, and Randy's going to have a live scope on his boat. And I don't know. It's going to be a sad day for a lot of people.
Hey, I'm seriously thinking about going back to a flasher. Now think about that. I'd be the only dude out there on the circuit that has 2 flashers, and that's it. And think if you won a tournament like that, it might start a new trend. They may make a comeback.
The Flasher only tour. You could just call it Flashers. Oh, that may actually not be the best name for a tour. But okay, well, we'll figure something out. If you win a tournament with a Flasher on your boat, Randy, that would go viral. I guarantee
it would. I guarantee it.
Oh man,
I don't know if you can buy them anymore, can you? Surely you can. I'd probably get some from David Fritz. He still uses them, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you can just go to the pawn shop. I'm sure they have them for $3.99 in the back shelf somewhere. Just hook them up. You're all good.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks for tuning in the live stream. We're going to be posting everything to the Fish Moment podcast. We've been kind of delayed on that too. Kind of computer issues have kind of given a lot of glitches and stuff. I can't even export videos or do anything. So podcasts are going back up on the Spotify and Apple podcasts this week. We kind of got that process figured back out. So if you want to listen to this live stream back while you're driving to the lake or while you're doing anything at work or whatever, check out the Apple Podcast app or Spotify for the Fish the Moment podcast. And other than that, we'll see you guys next week back here, same place, same time, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. And have a great week. Randy, good luck. Talk to you later.
See you guys later.